Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Trump Watch. Well, Donald Trump, not surprisingly, he gave us a lot to watch during the past week. At the top of the list, of course, is his massive imposition of tariffs on countries around the world, his initiation of new trade wars against nations, causing economic chaos and devastation. It's really a fascinating phenomenon to watch. The fact that one person can do so much damage is really unbelievable. I mean, it shows you the power that the President of the United States has in our governmental system now. And it was never supposed to be like this. There were supposed to be three equal branches of government. One branch passes the laws, the other one enforces the laws. The president's job is to enforce the laws. That's not the system we live under anymore. The system that we live under is the president passes the laws and enforces the laws. That's what these executive decrees are all about. They're essentially called what I would call decree laws. That's what they were called when General Augusto Pinochet was doing the same thing in Chile. He was just issuing decrees. He didn't need to worry about Congress. He didn't need to worry about the courts. The courts had rolled over. The lawyers and the judges were scared to death, much like they're scared to death here in the United States, at least many of them. And so Pinochet would just issue decree laws, and the decree became the law. And this is what Trump is doing with respect to these tariffs. Keep in mind that a tariff is a tax. That's all it is, just a sales tax. It's a sales tax on goods that you buy from foreign countries. It's no different, though, from walking into a store here in the United States and paying a sales tax. You're just buying a good from a foreign country, from somebody in a foreign country, and you're paying a sales tax. That sales tax goes to the U.S. government. So here you have the irony that the Republicans have become the big taxers. And claiming that this is going to be a wonderful experiment. I mean, what? Taxes? You have to experiment with taxes? And not only that, but they're regressive taxes. They're taxes on the poor, on the lower middle class. I mean, there's people here in the United States that are barely making it. They're paycheck to paycheck. And all of a sudden you get a massive income, sales tax on those people. It's a huge, huge burden. And Republicans don't seem to care. They just don't care at all. As long as it's not a tax on the rich, what difference does it make? And the economic devastation on people around the world, poor people, indifference. It's like, oh, well, this is going to lead to a golden era in America with manufacturers and industries in the cities and so forth. This is incredible, an incredible mindset. And it really is causing devastation. And, think about it in these kind of terms. We should be striving for a world in which everybody's cooperating to better their economic well-being. And not in the sense that, you're running your business to better mankind. You can be running your business for your own best interests. Try to support your family. You're working in a business to support your family. But by entering into mutually cooperative relationships with people around the world who are doing the same thing, everybody's benefiting. It's like an interdependent world where everybody's striving to improve his economic well-being, and everybody's standard of living in the process is rising. Isn't that an ideal situation? In fact, I remember when I was a kid, China was a very poor country. They were obviously run by a communist regime, but totally socialized system, like in North Korea. Everybody was poor, consequently. But over time, China starts loosening up. And we were all celebrating this. Isn't this just a wonderful thing that they're loosening up their economic controls? They're getting rid of a lot of their socialism and their economic regulations. And lo and behold, the Chinese economy just started soaring. People's standard of living started skyrocketing. People started living normal lives. And apparently, though, that this was not a good thing in the eyes of U.S. officials, because U.S. officials, especially those in the national security establishment, Pentagon, CIA, and NSA, think in terms of empire. So when at the end of the Cold War, when the U.S. was the sole remaining empire, they wanted to ensure that there were no empires going to arise around the world that could compete against or be an adversary against the U.S. empire. And so they started perceiving, China's rising too fast. It's become an enemy. It's become an adversary. It's become a competitor. We need to bring it down. And so in large part, that's what these trade wars are about. U.S. officials recognize that they're going to hurt both nations, but they figured, well, we'll sacrifice the well-being of certain numbers of Americans who can withstand it because we have a stronger economy, but at least now we're downgrading. We're degrading. That was a term they use. And of course, that's the term they also use on Russia. How can we degrade these competitors, adversaries, instead of looking at the world as a cooperative endeavor? I mean, we should be celebrating the fact that the Chinese people are rising in economic prosperity. We should be celebrating that everywhere in the world. But apparently, no, we're supposed to be looking at these as adversaries, as enemies, as competitors. And let me give you an example of how atrocious this thing is turning out to be. I was reading that there's a small nation in Africa. I'd never heard of it, but it's called Lesotho. I don't think you're going to believe this because I had a hard time believing this. But in Lesotho, people are so poor that they make a per capita income $1,000 per year. Okay, that's their full income. It's not $1,000 a month, $12,000. No, it's $1,000 per year. That's their total income. That's how poor they are. And so they are thriving, so to speak, by selling blue jeans to the United States. Well, they don't actually sell the blue jeans. They make the blue jeans, and then they ship them to the United States, where then they're wrapped up and finished and then sold. So I think the article said that around 50% of their income in the nation is with this blue jean operation. So they export to the United States somewhere around $250 million in this blue jean business. But they only buy $3 million from the United States, which is not surprising because when your per capita income is $1,000, you can't buy a lot of things from anybody, But I got a feeling that what's going through the minds of President Trump and all of his advisors is they're looking at this. Now, I can't read their mind. I don't know, and I don't even know if they thought of Lesotho. But if they did, well, they must have, because they put this enormous tariff on Lesotho. I forget what it is, but I think it was like 40 to 50%. I could be wrong, but it was like enormous, which is going to just decimate them. Decimate these poor people that make their money by making these blue jeans. And so it's incredible devastation, and they're shocked. They don't understand this. But I'm sure what went through the minds of Trump and all his protectionist advisors was, look at this huge deficit, trade deficit, that they're exporting $250 million and they're only buying $3 million from us. We need to slam them with this gigantic tariff to teach them a lesson. Now, I don't know if that's what went through their minds, but I could easily imagine it because of this idiotic trade deficit nonsense. Yeah, I'm not in favor of laws that regulate economic activity or that interfere with freedom of speech, but if somebody were to propose a law that prohibited U.S. officials from publishing any or accessing any information about trade deficits, I'd be tempted to say, hey, let's go in and enact that one. This is sheer economic idiocy. Just idiocy. And of course, I don't have to go over all the arguments. You all know them. That Richard Ebeling has pointed out many times, the trade deficit that exists between him and his grocery store. That he goes in and buys a bunch of stuff, but they don't buy his teaching, his classes. So there's a huge trade deficit. Or just look at the states. Think of your state and the trade deficit that exists between it and Virginia. Or if you live in Virginia, think about the trade deficit between Virginia and Florida. Do you lose sleep about it? Do you pace the floors at night? Do you even know what the trade deficit is? Do you know which one is a trade deficit? You don't, because it doesn't matter. It's ridiculous. It is one of the most inane principles in the world of economic fallacies. And yet here it is. So these poor people are going to be devastated because people have these very, very archaic beliefs on economics. I mean, to me, it's just phenomenal that there are still people who believe in tariffs and trade wars and protectionism and sanctions and embargoes. It boggles my mind. I mean, how many years since Adam Smith wrote his great book, The Wealth of Nations, talking about the principles of free enterprise, and yet here we are. It boggles the mind. But let me tell you what the biggest point here for me is, and for I think the future of Freedom Foundation, because after all, we're about freedom at FFF. So we can talk about all the economic damage that this thing is causing, the stock market plummeting, the impoverishment of people, the regressive taxation that falls on the poor. We can talk about all the adverse consequences of this economic inanity and economic idiocy. But for me, the most powerful argument of all is the destruction of freedom. And it's ironic that Americans are not thinking about that. I very rarely see that, even among libertarians, certainly not among conservatives. The argument that what Trump is doing is destroying our freedom. Now, what do I mean by that? Or I should say accelerating the destruction of our freedom. Well, if we go back to the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson says that we're all endowed with certain fundamental, inherent, God-given rights, including foreigners. He didn't limit it to Americans. And that's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And these rights pre-exist government. They're not privileges that the government gives us, despite what U.S. officials believe. We don't have to be thankful to the government for our fundamental, natural, God-given rights. And when we talk about liberty, we need to reflect on that. What does it mean to be free? Now, one of the big problems we have in this area, and one of the reasons why Americans don't bring up this argument in opposing the tariffs, is that most Americans think they're free. They're convinced they're free. It's my favorite quote in the entire history of the libertarian movement, Goethe's quote, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." And that's the American people. They are truly convinced that they're free. And it starts in the first grade with the indoctrination that comes in the public, i.e. government schools or the government school system. Many licensed private schools teach the same thing. You live in a free country. And so everybody's going around, singing that song by Lee Greenwood, "Thank God I'm an American, because at least I know I'm free." And that's what befuddles them when they hear about libertarians, because they'll say, well, Jacob, what does the Future of Freedom Foundation do? We advocate achieving a free society. What? Jacob, we're already free. What are you talking about? And that's their mindset. And some of them go all the way to their deathbed with this mindset. It's very sad. Encased in like 6-inch thick indoctrination, a layer of indoctrination. And we libertarians were lucky. We broke through it. I remember the day when I broke through the indoctrination. It was like this encasement was just cracking apart. And then I could see reality. And so when we talk about freedom, we're talking about the right to keep what you own and do what you want with it. It's your money. It belongs to you. This is your natural God-given right to do whatever you want. You want to buy a Chinese automobile, or you want to buy a Chinese laptop, or you want to go to Cuba and spend money there, it's your right. But this is what they destroy. This is because they don't see it as a right. And unfortunately, most Americans don't see it as a right. Or they think they're already free. And so when the government says, well, we're going to prohibit you from spending your money by traveling to Cuba or buying a laptop from China, we're going to impose a terrible tax on you to prohibit you from doing that. Nobody sees it, or I should say few people see it. This is a destruction of freedom. And that's why I think it's most important that we oppose this whole system. Is that if we want a free society, that society that necessarily is a system that is based on the concepts of free trade. Now, we also see this in the area of immigration. I've long said that you've got a police state along the border there. It's highway checkpoints, warrantless searches, all the things that you find in totalitarian countries, boarding of buses, checking people's papers. It's really phenomenal to live down there. I lived, 30 years, more than 30 years on the border, and it's a police state. DEA, ICE, Immigration Service, La Migra, FBI. I mean, shoot, man, you just go down to Dunkin' Donuts and they're all there, So what they do, what we've seen is the expansion of this police state now nationwide. And you've got, massive undertakings by the federal government to ferret out illegal immigrants and now, deporting them under this ridiculous 1798 wartime law. I mean, it's just amazing that this claim that this violent gang in Venezuela is invading the United States. I mean, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and let them and assume that they really believe this. Because I can't believe they would just flagrantly lie. Can you? I mean, they really believe that America's being invaded by this Venezuelan gang. It's a drug gang. But here's the irony, is that this gang, Tren de Aragua, that they're using as their excuse, to deport these Venezuelan immigrants to El Salvador, which we'll talk about in a minute in the context of another subject. That gang is a direct result of the U.S. drug war. You see, so here's the irony. They bring this gang into existence with their drug war, because that's what a prohibition does. Just we saw it in alcohol prohibition with Al Capone and all the alcohol gangs and the violence and so forth. That's what the drug war has done. It brings into existence these cartels and these drug gangs, and then they use the gang that they have brought into existence with their policies as the excuse to destroy our freedom here, because they're saying now the gang that we have brought into existence with our policies is invading the United States. Invading? No. An invasion is what the U.S. government did to Iraq and to the people of Iraq. Bombs, missiles, soldiers, destruction, death. Okay? It's not a drug gang. Now, there's another aspect of this Venezuelan thing, that Venezuela has a socialist system. Okay? It's caused massive problems. The drug gangs have caused massive problems. They recruit people, their children, teenagers, to work for them. And if they say, if you don't come and work for us, we'll kill your parents. It's been a horrible place to live. But what the U.S. government did is they made it worse. They imposed sanctions on it. Now, so here we again, controls, economic controls that are not only hurting people in Venezuela, they're destroying our freedom here at home. They're saying, you cannot trade with the people of Venezuela with your own money. And you're a free person. You're free to obey orders. And if you disobey these orders, we will put you in jail. But you're a free person. So the sanctions served as a vice that just squeezed whatever lifeblood there was out of this economy. And so this caused a mass exodus of people. I mean, I imagine in history there's been bigger exoduses, but this was like 7 or 8 million people leaving because they need to survive. And because of the violence of the drug gangs that the U.S. drug war has caused. So then they come to the United States trying to survive. They've got family members, kids, and so forth. And all of a sudden, they're bad people. They're the bad guys in all this for wanting to save their lives from U.S. sanctions and the U.S. drug war. And President Maduro's their socialism, and before him, Hugo Chavez. I mean, there's something wrong with this picture. I mean, but you see, Americans don't want to think about that. They don't want to think about the responsibility that their own government, that they support wholeheartedly with their drug war and their system of immigration controls and their sanctions. Notice, you don't see any big protests against sanctions. The embargo against Cuba, squeezing the lifeblood out of the Cuban people for decades. For what? Just to cause economic devastation in order to get regime change? And that's what the whole Venezuela thing is about, the sanctions, to try to get regime change. But the people in the middle are the poor, the Venezuelans, who they sell everything they have and they still not enough. They can't survive. They leave by the millions. And many of them come to the United States through Mexico. They're bad people. That's what U.S. officials tell us. They're bad people. They're all rapists and murderers and thieves. And so what do they want to do? They want to forcibly return them to Venezuela, where they're going to die. That's why they left in the first place. Now, these are not people that, a lot of Mexicans come up to improve their lives. Okay, they have a basic, fairly comfortable life in Mexico, but they're trying to better it, much like Americans like to better their lives. It's sort of like human nature. And so, but that's not Venezuela. These are people that are trying to survive. I mean, when you're dying of starvation and your kids are threatened with starvation, they don't have anything to eat. You do what you can to survive, and that's these people, the Venezuelans, those millions of people. They didn't leave to just better their lives. They left to survive, and they come over here, and what does the U.S. say? Send them back with the full support of many immigration control advocates who go to church every Sunday. Every Sunday they go to church. Brotherhood of man, Jake, I'm going to church. Brotherhood of man. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. We're going to talk about that in church, Jacob. Oh, that's great. That's great. And they got that religion on their sleeves there, and they're really proud of it. And then Monday morning, send those people back to Venezuela where they can starve to death. Who cares? Man, they didn't have any right to come here. This is terrible that they escaped that starvation. Send them back so they can starve to death there in Venezuela, because that's what awaits them, or the gang warfare. And so then the U.S. government uses that crisis, which they have helped cause, with this massive exodus of immigrants and then coming into the United States, as a way to destroy our freedom with this dysfunctional immigration control system that produces the police state. We can see now that it's not just a police state down there. They're using it to destroy due process of law. Okay, that's what these sending these Venezuelan immigrants to El Salvador is about. Because El Salvador, it has a penitentiary down there, ready to house them for the payment of money. The president there got paid $6 million, and I got a feeling that may be the largest amount of money that guy's ever seen in his life. And he gets these things, these monies, and then they send the immigrants down to him without any due process of law. So it's an attack on due process. Now we can say, oh, well, Jacob, that's just a due process of law with respect to immigrants. That doesn't apply to us. Oh, on the contrary, that once you establish that an immigrant is not entitled to due process of law, it's just one step further, that in the right national emergency, neither are Americans. And we see this time and time again, where they extend the destruction of life or liberty of an immigrant, of a foreigner, to the United States. We see this with state-sponsored assassinations. Remember, everybody was cheering when the Pentagon and the CIA wielded the power to kill terrorists? You see, and that was the whole post 9/11 thing. Terrorists, we can kill them. We're on the battlefield. They're illegal combatants. We don't need to give them any due process of law. No trial for that. Who cares if terrorism is a crime on the federal books? We're now going to call it an act of war. They're not wearing uniforms. We can assassinate them. Oh, well, then what about Americans? Oh, well, let's not talk about that until they come to a point where they find an American that they think's a terrorist and they label a terrorist and they say, boom, and they kill him, and the courts roll over and say, okay, well, he's a terrorist. And so don't tell me that these things don't cross over. They do cross over. When they're using this immigration system to destroy freedom of speech, they're saying that freedom of speech is not a fundamental right. If it was a fundamental right, it adheres to everybody. That's what Jefferson was saying. But what they're saying is, no, it's not a fundamental right. We can deny visas, green cards, and all this other ridiculous immigration control rigmarole they have to deport these people for exercising speech that we don't like. And if they can do that, it's just one step over to the United States. Because if they're not fundamental rights, they're not fundamental rights for anybody. And if they're privileges, which is what they think they are, then they can apply to anybody. Now, let me shift gears a little bit here. That Trump keeps talking about a third term. And people go, yuck, yuck. Oh, he's just kidding. He's just kidding. I'm not so sure. He keeps returning to the subject. His assistants and his supporters, Trumpsters, return to the subject. And people are trying to figure out, well, what does he have in mind here? Because the Constitution clearly prohibits it. And one of the journalists said, well, would your plan be to put Vance as the presidential candidate and you be the vice presidential candidate, and then Vance resign and then you're the president again? And Trump said, no, not that. And I don't think it is either. I don't think he could trust Vance to go along with the deal. I mean, what if Vance says, whoops, changed my mind, I'm going to be president? So and then that leaves Trump as vice president for 4 years, which is Vice President Garner once said wasn't worth a bucket of spit or something like that. So I don't think Trump's thinking about that. But what about a constitutional amendment? Well, he's certainly not trying to do that. He'd have a very difficult time getting it out of Congress and then approved by the states, but I don't see any effort. So what could he possibly be thinking about? And this is where I think the mainstream press and the American people are not thinking of the more direct route. And that is that he just remains as president. Just remains as president. Who's going to do anything about it? You see, because once the courts go silent, there's no obstacle here anymore. I mean, how's that going to be enforced, especially if he consolidates his control over the military? The military is the wild card because we have a big standing army now, a national security state. This is what Eisenhower warned about. And this is what our founding fathers warned about, standing armies. Not only are they, a threat in terms of their control over the old governmental structure, but when they combine with the ruler, the president, that becomes the biggest threat of all when they're all together. And right now, Trump is clearly consolidating power over the military. He's ousting some generals. He's ousting people out of the National Security Administration. He's got his person there in the CIA. It'll take him a while to get loyal generals, to make sure that these generals are loyal and they're going to follow orders. But once he gets the top generals, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, loyal to him, devout Trumpsters, everybody below that, the one-star generals, all the colonels, the captains, the majors, and so they'll fall into line. Of course, the enlisted men will fall into line. And so here is Trump pushing the boundaries with these judges, like this Judge Boasberg. Trump is pushing the envelope here, trying to see how much he can get away with. That the judge has issued an order barring him from using this ridiculous 1798 law to destroy freedom, due process of law for these immigrants, sending them to El Salvador. But the question is whether somebody in this administration violated the judge's order, saying turn those planes around, and said to heck with him, go ahead and deliver them. And that's still not clear yet. The Judge Boasberg, is oriented toward contempt. But what does contempt mean? Contempt means he's got to punish somebody for having violated his order. That means jail. He's not going to fine them because they'll just use taxpayer money for that. Well, he might. But for him to make a meaningful sanction, it's got to be jail time. What if they don't comply? And to this point, Trump has said, well, I will comply with judicial orders. But you can see instances where they're not complying, where they're violated the judge's orders. And this is one of the real fallacies of our system, our constitutional system from the very beginning. It's always based on the assumption that the president will comply with judicial orders, that the judicial branch is the ultimate arbiter of what's legal and what's constitutional. But what if the president says, which many of his supporters are advocating, I am the ultimate arbiter. I know what's best for this country. National security is at stake. And these judges, we need just to impeach them and remove them if they buck me, if they declare any of my stuff unconstitutional. And so you've got attacks on the law profession that are taking place. Many of the lawyers are rolling over, and they're scared. Lawyers are scared, and they come up with all kinds of rationalizations of, oh, well, this doesn't involve us or whatever. But it's like that in any. You look back in history in totalitarian regime when the regime starts going after people, targeting certain people, and everybody else just keeps their head down and says, this is none of my business. This is none of my business. I'm not going to get involved. And there's that famous quote by Niemöller, first they came for the communists, and I didn't protest because I wasn't a communist, and then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't protest. And at the end of this list, then they came for me, and there was nobody left to protest to help me out. So if we get to a point where the president realizes that the judicial branch really has no way to enforce its orders, this is what I meant by the flaw, is that it's always based on the good faith decision of the executive branch to comply with the judicial orders, even though all the power lies with the executive branch, especially if it combines with the national security branch of the government. Because imagine a judge saying, Mr. Trump, you can't run. And Trump says, oh, this is a federal election. I'm federalizing the election. We got a national emergency here, big economic crisis, stock market's plummeting, and I'm running again. And no, we've declared this unconstitutional. Bye-bye. So the U.S. Marshal, they hold Trump in contempt or whatever, and he just calls the 82nd Airborne Division. Which is more powerful, the Marshal Service or the 82nd Airborne Division? And this is the danger, that if the courts roll over and the Bar Association rolls over, then we're looking in the land of dictatorship, where the president can do anything he wants. If he wants to remain as president, there doesn't have to be an election. Elections are suspended just like they are in Ukraine. He just remains. Who's going to oust him if he's got all the force, the power of the national security establishment behind him, the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA? The U.S. Marshals that enforce judicial orders, they can't go up against that. And this is the danger with a judiciary that's no longer independent, that just rolls over, gets scared, and abrogates their duty to society and to the preservation of a free society. This is what happened in Chile. I've mentioned this before, that when Pinochet took over, people got scared. And rightly so. This is a brutal guy. But he wasn't worried about the courts anymore. And the courts rolled over. They were scared. Judges were scared. The Bar Association was scared. And so everybody rolls over. They sustain whatever he's doing. Yes, sir. You want to round up those 50,000 dissenters, socialists, communists, totally innocent people, and had them brutally tortured and raped. 50,000 with no due process of law. And the courts did nothing because they couldn't do anything because he ignored the courts. And they knew they were going to ignore him. And the Bar Association went silent. Many years later, as I've pointed out before, after he was ousted, 17 years he stayed in office. Okay? No elections. He just stays in office. Courts couldn't do anything about it. He's ignored the courts. And after he was ousted, the Bar Association issued a public apology to the people of Chile saying, we failed you. We abrogated our responsibility. And that's the danger of these law firms here in the United States that are scared to death Because, oh gosh, Jacob, what if he targets me? What if he targets my firm? We might lose business or whatever. Yeah, you might lose some business, but that's just the way it goes sometimes, to stand up to preserve what we have in this country. And so that's where we are. We have to keep fighting for principle if we're going to be free. I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Thank you for tuning in to This Week's.